Hey guys, Dan here with Dan Reviews It, Dan Does Disney, and our first ever Zoom cast. We figured out how to make this work. I've got Tim here. Say hello, Tim.
Hi.
Tim's got his own lovely DVD background with all his great movies. I see Devil Wears Prada there, Tim.
Yes.
That the high heel is hard to miss.
I
Uh,
know.
I don't know
That
what
was
else
that was inherited from my mom. I didn't
I
personally
say.
buy it, but it is a great movie.
It is actually a really good movie, yes. I know when I do my videos, the one that sticks out is Click because it's got a bold blue, just says Click down the side very clearly. But anyway, we're going to talk about Victory Through Air Power. Tim, you watched this like a month and a half ago, right before the quarantine. We were about to do a video for it right after we did Saludos Amigos, and then this whole thing happened. And it took me a while to figure out how to do a Zoom recording, so here we are. So do you remember this movie? You said you took some notes.
I took some notes. I do remember most of it. So I mean, I might not know some details, but I do remember most of it.
Okay, very good. So as we do with Dan Does Disney, up front here, I'll give a little background about the movie itself and the production, and then Tim will basically be the first to give us the actual review of the movie. I do want to say that we watched this through a bootleg copy of these Disney Treasures DVDs that I have. This one is on the front lines. It's got disc one is like all these classic shorts. Donald Duck is in some of them, but a lot of them are just educational shorts. And then disc two is this Victory Through Air Power plus some behind the scenes stuff. I didn't really go and watch all of that stuff just because you can't really get the DVD anymore. I mean, it's been out of print for about 15 years, so I thought that was sort of pointless. But I did watch the trailer. Did you watch any of the other things on the DVD, Tim?
No, I just watched Victory Through Air Power.
Okay. I mean, that's the main part of
The
it.
introduction by what's his face?
Oh, Leonard Maltin.
Yes.
Yes. He introduced all of the Disney Treasures DVDs. There's 2 in each set, and I think there's like 16 sets or something. And each one's a little different with the historical value. But for those of you watching, I did find copies of this movie on YouTube. One of them is a completely black and white version, I guess from 16 millimeter prints or something. And then the other one is the colorized version, but it has about 20 minutes of sort of commentary in front of it. And I can put the links to both of those in the description. But so this is from 1943. It's based on a book from a year earlier, the same name by Major Alexander P. Spersky. And he is, for all intents and purposes, the star of this movie. He is the only person you really see other than, I guess, I mean, you don't really see the narrator, but it's narrated, I guess by Walt Disney himself. It was nominated for an Academy Award for the Best Score. And basically what happened was RKO Pictures, who had been releasing Disney stuff up to that point, said, we don't want to do this at all. We don't think it's going to make any money. It's very propaganda heavy. Goodbye. So Disney released it through United Artists, which had done some of his shorts in the 30s. Cost $1.2 million to make and distribute, and only made about $800,000 in its release. It was released in 43 and 44, and then never again, largely because of the propaganda elements, and they just decided, well, it makes Germans and Japanese look really bad, so we're just gonna kind of put it in the quote-unquote Disney vault until they release these Disney Treasures. Which, by the way, is pretty cool. I mean, A Song of the South obviously is one that will probably never see the light of day. But I think it's cool that we're getting this sort of stuff in, drips and drabs. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I thought this was a very interesting movie. I did read that the one, basically only the self-contained History Through Aviation was used by itself, I think, a few times as a short. I'm not sure. It's like educational purposes or something like that, but not as the whole movie.
Yeah, I think they may have released parts of that as a short. And what's interesting is so Walt was already working on a sort of history of aviation sort of film when he read this book and was like, oh my God, well, this is a great book and he's got a bunch of great ideas. So let's all put it together. So yes, this movie, as Tim will tell us here in a moment, is sort of like the first 20 minutes or so is history of aviation. And then the last 45 minutes is all the war stuff, specifically about using, planes in World War II. And so the only other thing I really want to say as a prelude to this is that this movie heavily influenced apparently Winston Churchill and FDR in going, full guns here to attack the Germans. They, I guess, weren't convinced until they saw these methods and this film and how it could be put to use. And obviously not all of it holds up, and some of it has, clear holes of like, all right, well, that wouldn't really work. It's sort of, this guy's sort of like a futurist basically, and saying, well, this is how it could play out. But yeah, because of that, Disney was sort of curated to do a lot of informational and educational shorts for the troops, for schools, for other things. But this is sort of the start of the whole Disney educational feature film realm, which we still see today now with the nature documentaries and that sort of thing. This was sort of, how he got in his foot in the door, because other than that, all the features had been completely animated, Snow White, Pinocchio, that kind of thing. So let's hear a little bit about how this movie holds up, 75 years later or something like that, right? So, yeah, about that, with Victory Through Air Power from 1943.
Okay, well, so I'll give a basic synopsis of the movie. As Dan said, Victory Through Air Power is based on Alexander De Seversky's book of the same title. This movie is unlike anything, any other Disney movie that has been reviewed on this channel as part of Dan Does Disney thus far, because its purpose was not to entertain. It was to send a message, making it a propaganda movie. The message was an important one during World War II, and that was the committing to long-range bombing via aircraft. The movie starts with a dedication to General Billy Mitchell, who I guess predicted the danger and importance of the use of air power in war as early as 1919. So I guess that was like shortly after World War.
Right after the World War, yeah.
And then we start with the first cartoon, which is the history of aviation, which is basically the only self-contained part of the like short of the movie. As you guess, it takes us through the history of aviation, starting with the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk in 1903 through World War I, where we saw a rapid increase, improvement of aircraft, starting as like reconnaissance planes, and then ending with over 20,000 conflicts in the air. It takes us through the development of aircrafts during peacetime after World War One. It names drop Lindbergh and Howard Hughes there for us. And it ends with the start of World War II. And it illustrates the vast improvement of aircrafts from World War One to World War II at the start of it, talking about its range and firepower and bomb load capacities. And I thought that was actually really interesting.
Yeah, I thought the whole first section was really cool.
Yeah. I mean, there was some things that I circled that I thought was really interesting. Like, I don't think I realized that the Wright brothers plane only flew for 12 seconds, 120 feet, and there was only 5 witnesses there. I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, I think I found that out at the Air and Space Museum, but obviously in the 40s, I would have been like, wow, I definitely didn't know that.
Yeah. And then, like, I thought another interesting thing was that there was like a contest to fly across the continental U.S., and there was like a train following the plane. For every time it crashed, it replaced stuff, and like there's only 2 pieces of the craft left, and it fell short of like the prize by like 19 days. It took like 9 days to do that, and I thought that was really interesting. I never knew about that.
Yeah, I never knew about that either. That was very cool.
Yeah. And then an interesting fact that I thought really like about World War I was that in 4 years of war, the development of the airplane, if it had been during peacetime, it would have taken about 20 years for that development because it was just such an important part. So after that short cartoon, we finally get to meet Tversky. It takes us through like an introduction of him, of who he is. He was a Russian fighter pilot in World War I. He got down, lost a leg, went back out and fought some more. He was the leading ace for Russia. He had like 57 confirmed kills. And then after World War I, he came to America. He became a U.S. citizen, and he helped design and revolutionize airplanes in the U.S. during that peacetime. He set records and a bunch of other stuff. And then finally, we actually get to meet him, and he talks to the viewer, kind of like just like kind of like we're doing right now, and just talks about like the importance of air power. And it takes these short live action interview or talks that he gives to the viewers and intercuts that with animated sections that drive home the points that he's making. The first one is how the Allied forces failed to use air power correctly, and how Germany was able to use airplanes correctly. I think what was it called? It was called like Speed and Surprise. It was like the spearhead. He kept saying it was the spearhead of the German campaign. The planes would come in and clear all the ground troops, and then the German ground troops would come in and like that, and showed us how easy Germans used the planes to defeat first France with their bunkers because they planned for another World War I, and then how they could just elude the British like ships that they had. They could just fly right over them, and then the land planes were vastly better than planes that could take off from aircraft carriers at that point. So they were basically sitting ducks at that point.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. The air power versus the land power and the sea power. And
yeah,
how it was.
Yeah, and it was animated very coolly. Like it was very, very awesome as well. At sometimes, like they had like crash planes turning into tombstones that kind of looked like that. So I thought it was very stylized in a way as well. But it took us through Dunkirk. It took us through Pearl Harbor and things like that. Then Tversky pops his head back in and talks to us about now we finally, as the Allied forces finally realize how we can use airplanes correctly. But now our supply lines aren't going to be able to hold up against German forces, and talks about supply lines for a little bit. And then at this point, he transitions to how important it is to use air power for long-range purposes. And this is the kind of part where he kind of like predicts how we could do things, and a lot of the things that he predicts don't actually happen.
Right.
He talks about how we can use islands in Alaska and take off from there if we develop long-range bombings, but that island that was in Alaska would not be conducive for airplanes taking off from there. He talks about some bombs as well. I did read that one of the bombs the British developed, it was like the rocket power bomb.
The Disney bomb.
They call it the Disney bomb. But some of the other bombs seemed ridiculous and things like that. But it did show us the importance of increasing the range of our bombers so that we could be more effective. I think that was the main point of that section. If you kind of ignore all the stuff that didn't happen and stuff that you were like, that could never happen, but just look at the message, I think the message was important. And then it just it ends with I thought a really cool stylized section where like if we did everything that we were supposed to do, how the eagle could beat the octopus.
Yes.
Uh, obviously the eagle representing the Allied forces and America and octopus. At that point, they already showed the defeat of Germany, but the octopus was more illustrating of Japan and how it kind of like used its supply lines kind of like tentacles and like things like that. But that's
Is that the part with the Hitler wheel?
yeah, that the Hitler wheel was the Germans, and then the octopus was the Japan.
Okay, yeah, I thought that was a cool way to sort of illustrate and demonstrate, you know, the supply chain and stuff that I think people certainly weren't probably thinking of back then.
Yes.
I mean, you know, we kind of see it now with the quarantine. People, you know, with toilet paper and stuff, you don't think about, well, it has to come from the manufacturer and da 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 da. You just know your store's out of toilet paper and you're mad about it. So it's odd that that still kind of rings true for people today, that you really need something like demonstrated and visualized until you understand it.
Yeah, because I imagine as someone during World War II, like, oh well, why can't our supply lines meet the same supply lines as Germany? But Germany was going by land, and we were going across the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans, and there was a whole bunch of U-boats there.
Right.
So it was a lot easier for them to reinforce their troops, and like sometimes we would try to reinforce our troops, and then that boat would sink, and it would just be like, okay, let's send another boat.
Yeah.
So, oh no, I thought this movie was actually very interesting. I'm surprised that it doesn't get used as an educational tool in schools. Like, I felt like, especially the history of aviation, but even the first section of how Germany was able to surprise and defeat France and Britain. I think they showed that very well. And I think I learned about that in high school, but I don't think I learned it that well as I did watching this movie. Yes, the last third of the movie is the hypothetical section. So maybe you could even just cut that out or just talk about how at that time, those are some of the ideas that they had.
Yeah. When I found the black and white version of it on YouTube today, I sort of scrolled down to the comments to see, you know, what people thought of it. And for the most part, it's film history classes that were shown. You know, it was commented, oh, you know, my professor from film history, you know, showed me this. But yeah, you're right. It wasn't like regular history classes that were looking this up. It was mostly film historians that were like, oh, here was the first, you know, big Disney propaganda movie or big Disney educational movie or whatever. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think they could chop up that the history of aviation part. That could be its own educational tool. I mean, they should play that at the Air and Space Museum. You know, for you know, a quick 20 minutes or whatever. And then you're right. The first part of Seversky's, you know, talking and speech is all about more from a historical perspective than it is, you know, the last part, which is the future part or the hypothetical part, I guess. But yeah, I think this is all done in a very fun, educational way. And I think that's why it spoke to so many people at the time, because it wasn't just, you know, okay, A, B, C, and D. Between the animation of it being fun and interesting and, you know, it wasn't, I mean, it's not the same type of animation as we've seen in Dumbo and Cinderella and these big budget movies that took Walt years to animate with his team. I mean, this was sort of a quick animation style. It's a lot like some of the shorts back then, you know, with Mickey Mouse or whoever else, that same style of animation, but it's effective here. I think it really drives the education because it makes it more interesting than Seversky just standing there and talking for an hour.
Yeah, but I thought Seversky actually did a really good job in the short sections that he actually had, that he was talking. I thought he was very dynamic, and they actually used some type of animation in one of them where he just kept walking. There was a different map there, and it was like kind of
Yeah, that was really
yeah. So, but I even thought like the animation it wasn't like the shorts, because History of Aviation was like the typical short that you would see, but the kind of like a little bit stylized map moving and things like that.
That was cool. Yeah.
I thought the way they did the explosions in the last section, I thought was very effective. Like they made it look like the screen was shaking. I thought that was actually drove the point very home.
You're right. Yeah, I guess towards the end it was definitely a little bit of a higher quality. I think from everything I read about how Walt was going to do the History of Aviation anyway, I think that whole first section was basically already done, and they were going to put it out as a short or as a something, you know.
I think they probably just added the last section there, or like maybe the middle section with about World War I, maybe, and then the last section of like leading up into World War II.
Yeah,
I think they might have.
I could see that even being a part of the original thing, because it was part of the History of Aviation.
Yeah.
So you could have said it that way. But yeah, I think you probably, if you were going to teach it in a history class or something, you probably would want to cut out all of the futuristic stuff about here's what we should be doing in World War II, or here's what, you know, this is. Or you could show it as a lesson in like, okay, here's what, you know, the Allied powers thought would work, or whatever. I think it is definitely fascinating as a historical artifact. But like you, I was surprised about how enjoyable and interesting it was.
Yeah, I was surprised as well. I thought it would be a snooze fest kind of movie,
right.
And I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, when I first brought this up, I was like, oh, you know, I know you were going to do some of the cartoons with me, and I was like, you don't want to do this victory through air power. You were like, not really, but I mean, whatever, I'll do it. Because you're a player. But
I was pleasantly surprised by this movie.
Yeah, I was as well. So with these, you know, old Dan Does Disney stuff, everything has to sort of be taken into historical context and da-da-da-da-da. Obviously, there is some offensive stuff, I guess, here towards Germans and Japanese. It is essentially a propaganda film, at least the end part. But I think pretty much any war movie at that time was. I mean, I've seen a few, and they all seem to be, you know, rah, rah, go America.
Yeah, I don't think it was that offensive either. Like, if you're looking at a historical point of view, you'd be like, okay, yeah, I get that there's Nazis and there's the Japanese fighters as well, but I don't think they use any derogatory terms towards them, I don't think.
No, not that I heard. And
yeah,
there's certainly some out there that they could have, but they didn't. Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I did the Oscar A to Z thing, there were a couple movies in the A's that were World War II related at the time, or maybe shortly after, and it was all kind of like this. I mean, it was, you know, you're not going to have a pro-German movie in the 1940s. You're just not.
Unless you get from Germany.
Well, right, I guess that's true, right, but not from an American company. So I could see where it's okay, it's propaganda, but also so would everything else have been at that time. I don't know. Like, I feel like you could say war movies today are almost propaganda in that way because of the way things are depicted. I don't know.
They're based off history, so it's not like you're going to go see Saving Private Ryan and have a positive outlook towards German soldiers during that time.
Right. So I don't know. Even from that perspective, from a historical perspective, it doesn't seem like it's that, you know, oh my gosh, I could see why they threw this in the vault for 60 years and nobody was allowed to see it. To me, I feel like, from at least my memory of Song of the South, Song of the South is a lot worse than this, you know, in terms of racism. Which, by the way, I think I told you this earlier, but I'm trying to track down a legitimate copy of Song of the South because it was on VHS at some point. So I know there's some DVD burns floating out there. I'm gonna try and track one down because I think that would be in 2 or 3 movies. Because I've never seen the whole thing. I don't think.
I don't
But
even know if I've seen sections. I just know that like Zippity
you've seen
Doo
the Zippity Doo-Dah, right?
I the song. I don't know if
Yeah.
I ever saw the section that it's from.
Oh, okay. You know the ride, the Brer Fox ride.
I know
Yeah.
they're from that movie. But other than that, I don't think I've ever saw it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna try and track it down. I think it's literally in 2 more movies. I think it's 3 Caballeros and then Song of the South. So, but all right. I guess in wrap up here, we should give our grades. I definitely learned things from this movie. I mean,
I did learn some stuff that I thought was very interesting.
I'm not a huge history buff anyway, so even if I did know some of this stuff previously, I was in school 25 years ago, so I don't really remember. But Crete being such an integral part, Dunkirk. I mean, I know from the movie, but I didn't really know much about Dunkirk before that movie either.
Yeah, but I thought a good point about Dunkirk was that I didn't realize that the reason they were able to evacuate via ship was because the planes from Britain were in range, and the planes were better than the Germans' planes if they were both taking off from land. If they were taking off from boats, then the Germans' planes were better. When it was the land-based planes versus land-based planes, Britain had an edge, and that is the kind of like the reason why the Germans didn't take over Britain, because their planes were better. And they didn't talk about that in the movie Dunkirk.
No, they didn't.
Which I didn't talk about. What was it? You said Crete. That was on here somewhere.
Crete was real big, and I didn't realize that.
No, I didn't realize that either. But that was like in the middle of the Mediterranean and then the Germans were able to defeat that with their planes and didn't even have to use any ground troops. And then they do basically shore up the whole Mediterranean Sea that way.
Yeah. Definitely didn't know. And like I said, I've been to the Air and Space Museum, so some of the historical things about like the Wright brothers and stuff, some of that I knew from the beginning part, but a lot of that was new to me as well.
Yeah.
So I thought that was cool.
Yeah, and they were able to put a few things of humor in the aviation short there.
A little bit, yeah.
Not much, but that's the only place that you'll find any humor in this movie. Other than that, it's very educational.
Yes, you can tell that the lean of this, even in the aviation short, was to be informative and educational and not as much to entertain as some of his other stuff has done. But clearly, like I said, I mean, I think for an educational piece, it is also a lot of fun to look at.
Yes.
I remember the educational videos from like middle school, I'm sure you do as well, where it was just so dry and so boring. I think we could have used more of this type of thing infused in it.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to leave Victory Through Air Power with a B+.
I was thinking B+ as well.
Nice.
I think if you saw it in the 1940s, I think maybe it would have slightly higher grade. I think you'd probably be an A- if you saw it in the 1940s, because it probably educated you a lot better than it educated me, because I knew some information about World War II, but I think a lot of people as viewers kind of in the dark at that point as well about certain things. So I think probably they probably would enjoy it a lot better than me at this time. But
yeah, I would agree though, because at that time, all you really had, it wasn't even TV yet, so all you really had was radio and newspapers to tell you anything. So to see it visually represented, I think, would have been a whole new experience.
Yeah, but I would give it a B+ now as well. I mean, that's not even taken for historical like giving it like a skew as well. It was like B+ right now, like just watching it and enjoying it.
Yeah, I would agree because of the historical value of it. I think if they had maybe shortened up the last part of it with the whole here's what might happen, and at the end, I mean, the explosions were cool to watch, I will admit that, but it did seem to kind of just basically be making a case for nuclear warfare, which I don't know that I loved that part. But
I
the
don't
animation was cool.
know if it was nuclear warfare. I think it was just bombing warfare because all the bombs that he talked about, a nuclear bomb was not even talked about at that point. So I'm not sure if that was the.
No, it's never said. The word nuclear is never said, but that's sort of how I took it. Like, okay, this is the direction this guy's leaning in.
Okay.
But yeah, it's never actually like explicitly stated or whatever. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think this was quite the surprise. So, well, thank you, Tim, for joining. Hopefully this goes well and it looks and sounds great. And we will be able to do more of these during the quarantine.
Sounds good.
Because I'm always looking for content, and I'm glad that I can bring someone else on now to talk about things. So, all right, everybody, comment below. Let me know. I'll put those links too to the YouTube versions of this movie, so you can check them out on your own and let us know what you think. Tim, thanks for joining, and see y'all next time. Bye.